Selim Hill Selim Hill Tea Garden is spread over 1,000 acres right below Kershong and was hit quite hard because of the pandemic. Instead of selling it off to another bunch of realtors, we decided to stick it out and to create a revival and a renaissance for Darjeeling through the Selim Hill Collective at Selim Hill Tea Garden. The initiatives undertaken by the Selim Hill Collective are supported by the activities of Dorje. If you do like this talk, if you do like this conversation that we have planned and the initiatives that we have planned, do go ahead to our website and try to see if you can support us in any way. The easiest way is to buy a subscription, and we send the freshest seasonal teas to you every 3 months. Now, on to today's events. Today, we are joined by two very illustrious personalities who are talking to one of the most colorful personalities that I know. Dr. Kamal Bawa is a distinguished professor of biology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and founder president of the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, or ATREE, one of India's top-ranked environmental think tanks based out of Bangalore. He's done extensive work in the Himalayas for a number of years on a wide range of issues, from biodiversity conservation to climate change. And he's published more than 200 papers and authored and edited more than 10 books and been published in a number of journals. Along with Dr. Bawa, we're also joined by Dr. Sarala Khaling. She's the regional director for ATREE and based out of Gangtok in Sikkim. Today, Dr. Bawa and Dr. Khaling will be in conversation with Rajah Banerjee, who all of you probably already recognize, the pioneer of the organic movement in Darjeeling, the chairman of the Selim Hill Collective, and the person who's leading and spearheading the grassroots level movement through his Rinpoche Tea Studios. Over to you, Rajah. Hope to have a fantastic conversation ahead. I will be simply here in the background, meant to be pushing along the slides that Dr. Bawa and Dr. Khaling have prepared for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sparsh. I can see that you are moving faster than this DHR at the back of your, behind you in your background. Anyway, hi all. Hi, Doctor. Hi, Sarala. We're talking about climate change today. So the best way to start off is to ask you how the weather is your end, Doctor, in the East Coast of America. Do tell us that climate change has not affected you adversely like in the West Coast.
Well, it has. I think it has been an unusually wet July here in the Boston area. And I think that's what we anticipate from climate change, extreme weather events. So the West Coast has been very dry, and the East Coast in part has been very wet. Parts of the East Coast.
I see. Anyway, the monsoons over here has been very kind in Darjeeling, Sikkim, and North Bengal, which augurs well for all livelihoods, particularly the tea, which is in really bad shape at the moment. To get on with a real discussion, we all know that essential needs of marginalized have a devastating effect on biodiversity and climate change because they need the essence, the essentials. Now, Doctor, what are the challenges facing Darjeeling as an eco hotspot, global eco hotspot? And also, please tell us a little about ATREE and your vision.
Well, first of all, good evening to everybody. And good evening, Sarala, good evening, Rajah, and good evening, Sparsh. I'm just delighted to participate in these proceedings. Darjeeling has been a second home for almost 60 years. And I have seen for the last 60 years, the history of Darjeeling unfold in front of my eyes. And I think we face a number of problems in Darjeeling. And if I can have the first slide, Sparsh. I think we all know the urbanization challenge, the uncontrolled growth of the city, bursting at its seam, a city designed for perhaps not more than 20,000 people, holding on to a population 5 or 7 times larger or even more. Just just keep on the first slide. Yeah. And then there is a challenge of rural landscapes. And I will refer to that a little bit later. Tremendous land use change, deforestation, agriculture, expansion of tea estates. So the problem is not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas. Then, of course, these changes are going to be exacerbated by climate change, and I will talk about that a little later too. On the top of that, we really have, I would say, broken governance, lack of adequate policies, and essentially lack of leadership. And we will talk a little bit later how to overcome these challenges. I think we have to be very constructive. And in terms of Darjeeling, in terms of ATREE, ATREE's vision is very simple. If I can have the next slide, Sparsh. To see a society living in harmony with nature. And how do we achieve this vision? At ATREE, our mission is to achieve this vision in 3 ways. One is to generate knowledge, to address really our very, very pressing environmental challenges. The second is to enable the use of this knowledge by policymakers and society. And thirdly, to train the next generation of environmental leaders. And if I can have the next slide. And I think this slide basically shows how we are organized. So we have 2 centers here in the middle, Center for Environment and Development and Center for Biodiversity and Conservation, that generate interdisciplinary knowledge. And this knowledge feeds upstream to policymakers and downstream for action on the ground. And then we have Academy for Conservation and Sustainability Science to build future leaders, a doctoral program, a very novel doctoral program, which we are now extending to having a master's program too. And then we have community conservation centers. So as I show in the next slide, I think we are a very different type of organization. Yeah. So we are in a way think tank, which generally are involved in policy making. We are also an academic institution generating knowledge. And then for our action on the ground, we can be compared to a grassroots organization. So 3 types of organization rolled into one. It's very unusual, and we do consider our approach very unusual. But we think that this approach in the past has yielded results, and in future, it will yield even better results. So that's briefly about ATREE and the challenges we face.
I'd like to bring in Dr. Khaling now, Sarala, because you're the right arm of the extension of the Himalayan Eco Hotspot, and you're the person who's leading the charge for the regeneration. So can you tell us a little about ATREE's approach and ATREE's programs, please, Sarala?
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. And it's an honor and pleasure to be part of this conversation, especially in the presence of 2 stalwarts, Mr. Rajah Banerjee and Dr. Bawa, who's been engaged in this landscape for more than 40, 50 years, I think. For me, it's I'm really delighted, and it's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. So in terms of approach, as Dr. Bawa has already told us, the basic institutional setup that we are in, three things rolled into one: a think tank, academic institution, and a grassroots organization. Can I have the slide, please, Sparsh? So our approach in the Darjeeling Hills has been, no, the one before that, the slide before that. Yeah. So our approach in the Darjeeling Hills has been a very place-based research and action organization. And these are some of the characteristics, or these are some of our values that we have worked with in the region, where we have very deep engagement in the region and the regional problems. We also have we've had very long-term engagement. It's been almost 25 years since we've started working in Darjeeling. We engage with the communities and we try and make positive impact on the lives of the communities that we work with. Next slide, please. So our work is place-based research and action, and to address regional environmental problems. So when we say place-based approaches, we are site-specific wherever we work, and we look at specific problems of the site. And wherever we are working, we have direct engagement with the communities and the stakeholders. And there is a shared vision and a commitment from us, as well as from the communities wherever we work with. And we endeavor to have direct positive impacts on the lives of the communities, and with participatory approaches and working together. But at the same time, I think with a lot of reciprocal learning, where in the 25 years, we have failed in some of the actions that we have done on the ground, but we've again learned from the communities, learned from their suggestions, and we've been able to redesign and move forward. So this is not only, this place-based approach is not only with the Darjeeling office or our work in Darjeeling, but we have many such centers and place-based centers where we are on the ground, where we are into research and action. And what we believe is that with further collaborations, further partnerships with our own long-term field stations, we have many more long-term field stations across the country, and with strategic partners, we are able to even draw landscape-based conclusions and maybe come up with landscape-based models. So therefore, place-based models that we develop are ready for being tested or piloted. It's ready for being scaled up. And many times, different partners have taken these models and also replicated them. Next slide, please. With regard to some of our programs, so the programs that we have in the Darjeeling region are assessing biodiversity and ecosystem services. This we mainly do in the socio-ecological landscapes, which means in the agriculture landscape, in the tea landscape, and in the pastoral landscape. We are working on climate change, trying to understand people's perspective and perceptions on climate change, as well as doing deep scientific research and monitoring, trying to see how different key biodiversity elements are changing or being impacted. There is work on land use change. I think Dr. Bawa is going to talk more about it. And we've recently started also working on sustainable food systems, trying to understand how agricultural change or the patterns in agriculture are impacting the food systems, the local food systems. And we do a work on livelihoods, and I think I'll talk about it later on. We've been also working on human-wildlife interactions, looking more at conflict, especially at crop depredation, but more recently with colleagues from Bangalore who've been working under the One Health umbrella, or One Health approach. We are also trying to look at the zoonosis situation in Darjeeling. And leadership building, whether be at the school level, college level, or at the researchers level. And the other big thing that we are trying to do is also a lot of public engagement, and citizen science forms an important part of this public engagement. Over to you, Mr. Banerjee.
Yeah, so it's very interesting what you've gone about, reevaluation of any projects which have gone a little bust or sideline. You reevaluate and go back there to chase it up. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Now, Doctor, I'd like to come back to you and ask you the $1 million question, actually, which is the centerpiece of our discussions today. What are the impacts of climate change on the region, and how can we mitigate it, the ATREE?
Okay. Again, I think our approach to climate change issues have been somewhat unusual. Unusual in the sense that we have looked at the climate change from a scientific point of view, analyzing meteorological data, using remotely sensed imagery to look at the changes in the phenology, in seasonality. But at the ground, on the ground, we have worked with the local people to understand their perceptions of climate change. So I'm going to cover all these. And of course, first, in terms of the finding, I think many other people have also reported the same findings: increases in temperature, changes in rainfall. I think rainfall changes in the pattern of rainfall. Of course, total amount of rainfall too, but more importantly, there are extreme events, downpours, heavy downpours, and then periods without rain, even during the monsoon. Shifts in the distribution of species. And I think one notable example which people have experienced in Darjeeling is now you see mosquitoes at altitudes where you have not seen before. And there are tremendous health effects of such movements. Third, browning of forests. What does it mean? My colleagues in Bangalore, Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy and his associates published a really landmark paper a couple of years ago showing globally that in the mountains, the forests are facing stress. And the term browning is used as opposite of greening. They are showing stress in terms of water availability. And that should be a cause of concern. And then there are impacts on agriculture, and we'll talk about a little bit on that. And tea, of course, Rajah, you are familiar with those. I need not say much more, or whatever I say, I have to be very cautious. And then on effects on land use change. And let me shift to people's perception of climate change. And I have a video here, which I will begin.
Ranges on Earth.
Thank you. Got it.
Of flora and fauna. The monsoon is changing.
Volume is a little low.
Dr. Bawa,
Okay.
you increase the volume on your laptop and it will automatically become louder for everyone.
Aspect of the regional climate. What kind of changes are rural people noticing? How are they responding to these changes? One group that is trying to find out is the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, ATREE for short. We have come to talk with residents about what kind of changes they have noticed, if any, in the local weather patterns in their village. Mr. Kishore Rai has lived and farmed here in Rampuria for 66 years. He describes weather patterns changing over that time.
एकदमै आज झन्नै 5-6 वर्ष अगाडिदेखि चाहिँ एकदम ज्यादा बढेको अनुभव गरेको मौसम एक प्रकारको 15 दिन 22 दिनसम्म पानी एक प्रकारले आइरहन्थ्यो र कुनै अब किनभने अब गाईलाई घाँसहरू यसो बारीको खेतीहरू त्यो हाम्रो बस्तीमा त यसो बोरा सोरा ओडेर के गर्दाखेरि पनि अहिलेको त ठिकै सक्नै हुँदैन ऋतुहरूमा पनि बदलिएको छ.
Other farmers are also talking about climate change.
यहाँनिर अब बसेको 20-25 वर्ष भयो. यहाँ व्यापक रूपमा अब रुखपात थियो. रुखपात हुँदाखेरि अब विन्टर टाइममा एकदमै बेसी मात्रामा शीत हुन्थ्यो, तुषारो हुन्थ्यो, भुइँभरि तुषारो हुन्थ्यो. त्यसैले यहाँनिर सालैपछि हिउँ आउँथ्यो. यो 2-4 वर्ष भयो हिउँ आउनु पनि छोड्यो. घाम लाग्ने बेलामा घाम लाग्दैन, पानी पर्ने बेलामा पानी आउँदैन. पहिले असिना पर्नुपर्ने असिना पर्छ ऊ बेलामा अब हुनुपर्छ अब हिउँ आउँथ्यो यो त हाम्रो हिल्स पहाडी इलाका हो हिउँ आउनुपर्ने सालै पछि हिउँ आउँदैन असिना
They are concerned about the effects of climate change on agriculture.
मकैहरूलाई अब पहिला त्यो मकैहरू हाम्रो केही रोग थिएन एकदमै राम्रो फन्के लाग्दो डर पनि काम लाग्थ्यो अब अहिले त्यो डरहरू सब त पहिला उहिलेको चाहिँ सानै बोट बाए तापनि मोल नपुगे पनि टाइट हुन्थ्यो हुन्छ नि किन फल्थ्यो आफै डल्थ्यो यस्तो मुर्गी यस्तो बार बस्नु कोदो अहिले त्यो चाहिँ हुँदैन त्यस्तो पनि हुँदैन अब हामीले विचार गरे यता अलिकति मौसम नमिलेकै होला
र यो अलिकति मेरो अनुभवमा चाहिँ यो मौसमहरू चेन्ज भएर नै
यसले अब यो जलवायु परिवर्तनले होला हामीलाई चाहिँ अब यसले हामीलाई हानिकारक गरिरहेको छ जस्तो हाम्रो अनुभव छ हामी सबैको अनुभव हामीले मात्रै भनेर होइन यो के भएर भएको अब टमेटो के भएर चाहिँ
Farmers seem to think that there is widespread change in climate in the Himalaya, particularly in temperature and in rainfall patterns. We don't have very good data on the rate and magnitude of change in temperature as well as in rainfall in the Himalaya, but the limited data seem to confirm farmers' perceptions. There was recently a very extensive study on temperature and rainfall pattern changes in the Himalayan mountains. And those studies show that temperature is increasing and patterns of rainfall are also changing. But we need much more information.
But it's not only agriculture that stands to be affected by changing climatic conditions. Landslides have always been frequent occurrences in the Himalaya. We can't do much to prevent earthquakes or cyclones, but is there something else we can do to reduce the risk of damage to infrastructure and to people's lives and livelihoods in this region? There are literally hundreds of large and small hydroelectric projects being planned and built all along rivers throughout this region. Many of these projects are being planned in remote areas with pristine forests, steep slopes, and fragile soil. Each project needs roads for access, large equipment for construction, and lots of dynamite for earth moving. Are these massive landscape changing projects being designed in truly responsible ways? Is there enough investment in safety? Many people, including residents and outside observers, are afraid the answer may be no. So what are people doing about all this?
अब अहिले चाहिँ त्यस्तो सक लाग्यो र यो मकैहरूमा हामी अलिक अगाउ नै रोप्ने गऱ्यौँ भएर यो अलिकति हामी त्यो सिँचाइको लागि चाहिँ पानीको व्यवस्था गरेर हामीले खेतीलाई चाहिँ एकदम प्रशस्तै लग्छौँ नि
Villages in the more remote settlements depend upon wood stoves for cooking and heating. But traditional stoves have no external chimney, and wood smoke in the house causes many health problems, especially among women and young children. ATREE is working to distribute an improved cook stove model developed in Nepal. Community members are trained to construct, sell, and maintain these clay brick stoves. ATREE is also testing to improve stove models for emissions and for fuel efficiency, and the preliminary results are very encouraging. All across our globe, the climate is changing. In the high Himalaya, as in the polar regions, it appears to be changing most rapidly. These changes will continue to affect people's lives into the future. Adaptations are possible, but they must be facilitated at the local level by government agencies in collaboration with communities, and they must be supported at the state and national levels as well. All these require coordinated action among various stakeholders. It will require commitment, sustained efforts, and creativity. But there's no goal more important today than preparing to face the challenge of climate change.
So back to you, Sparsh, for the next slide.
Sparsh, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you.
Yeah, it is.
So finally, I wanted to make a comment on land use change. This is a brand new analysis just completed last week by Tenzing Ngti. And we can see here the change from 1988 to 2018 over a 40-year period. And I think what is noticeable here is that forests have declined about 7% during the 40-year period, and agricultural area has expanded almost threefold, and tea plantations have also increased. Equally important, the built-up area, sort of urbanization, has also increased tremendously. So we continue to use and lose natural habitats, and habitats, which will sequester more carbon, mitigate climate change. So we have problems on two fronts. So I'll stop here, Raja. I'm aware of the time and come back later, of course.
Yes, sure. Look, Sarala, I'd like to go back to you again.
Yeah.
We've seen the captions over there in the PowerPoint presentation, very moving, very precise and frightening at times too, because shrinkage of the trees is a great concern, and you're not increasing with tree cover, which you should. So I'd like you to tell us if you had any projects at all about ATREE's regional resurgence on livelihood projects for Darjeeling Hills, and how we have brought in permaculture, if at all. We'd be very happy to hear, to arrest this decline and go upwards in a dynamic sense. Would you please share a bit, Sarala?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have very ambitious programs. Oh no, this is a question to Sarala?
Yes,
me?
To me, Dr. Bawa.
Okay, go ahead, please, sorry. I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I'll come back to you a little later, but I'd like Sarala, as the person who's started ground initiative, to talk about that a bit, please. Just hang on to your horses. You're like the quintessential thoroughbred going past the winning post. Please, hang on a sec. Come on, Sarala.
All right, Sparsh, can you show that slide, please?
The next one.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So besides the research that Dr. Bawa talked about on climate change impact, we've also been doing work on sustainable agriculture, not exactly permaculture, I would say, Mr. Banerjee, but really climate smart agriculture. So helping the people, the farmers on the ground, deal with some of these issues of having too much rain or having too little rain. So, most of the people, if you look at Darjeeling, all of them practice traditional agriculture, integrated agriculture most of the time. And it's not that they haven't been doing many of these things, but it's just a way of making them aware about mitigation or adapting to the many changes that are happening in the region, and especially these environmental changes brought about by climate change. So in the climate smart agriculture, basically teaching or training people or showing people how you manage the soil, simple things like managing your animal husbandry in a better way so that you maximize and optimize the manure that you produce, and then also using.
Sarala, could you tell us a little bit about your livestock management? Because I don't see any pictures of any animals in any of your slides, or your compost management. Fertilization plan is so important.
So most of our field assistants, they have been trained on how to do this management of the cow shed, especially, I'm saying. So how do you separate the two, the liquid and the solid part, and how, it goes to the different parts. And with the liquid part, how would you make different, you can make different concoctions, which can be used as a fertilizer, but also as insect repellents, mixed with some, local plants that you can see a lot of people are sitting around with. So these are with just low sustainable, because, we are just using very, very low cost resources and natural resources which are available within the village. So it really doesn't cost the communities. And it's just a way of showing them in a technical way that why this is happening, what you're doing to the soil. If you treat the soil in a certain way, what happens to the soil, why the productivity would go up and all that. So also trying to say that during the winter months, when we have long dry spells, how do you preserve or conserve the soil moisture? So cover cropping, mulching, and so on and so forth. And also a lot of agroforestry, but with a lot of multiple use local species, not just to say plant species that are not important to the species, but which they would use for fodder, timber in their own land. And also sometimes, according to the communities, when they ask of us of horticulture species, then we also work with them on horticulture species.
Okay, you have a lot of diverse projects. And I see that most of the people over there of the older generation. Is this a trend? What about smart young farmers? I only see smart old farmers. What do you do to get smart young farmers? Sarala.
So I think for getting smart young farmers, we have to change the way we think about agriculture, because a lot of people still in our villages think that, agriculture is not paying, it's very difficult to do agriculture. And at the end of the day, there are problems in agriculture. Climate change is one of them, but there is also a lot of crop depredation. So they feel that agriculture is a very risky business. It might as well go and do some labor work up on the road, towards Darjeeling or Jorbanglo or some of these construction things. At least you get your wages at the end of the week. But how we're trying to see how then we can, develop, entrepreneurship among them. So that has been quite a challenge for us, because even the parents themselves don't want their children to be engaged in agriculture. But hopefully we are seeing some hope, because we've seen some really young entrepreneurs coming up in Darjeeling who've returned from, during the COVID period.
Is this a post-pandemic?
Yes, a post-pandemic kind of a thought that is coming in, because a lot of people were into tourism and all that and miserably failed. So again, they were back to doing cultivation. So we see hope, but I think from a policy level, from the availability of facilities, we have to facilitate that, not only from an NGO perspective, but even from a government. How do we retain these young people and do farming in a better way, because they are more tech savvy, they are interested in doing those kind of stuff, they are interested in farming, but they are also interested in being more entrepreneurs.
That's extremely encouraging. So
Yes.
You reckon it's a paradigm mind shift enforced by the pandemic?
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay.
They've
come back from distant lands, like Bangalore and so on. Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And it's also an opportunity for people like us to understand these, shift in the perception. So probably, and make use of them. Yes. Next slide, please.
Can you change the slides, Sparsh?
So the other activity that has been very popular is also doing the energy efficient technology, also as part of climate change mitigation work. So basically understanding the dependence on biomass, that is fuel wood, and being able to, I think people have really welcomed these stoves and these technique, which we learned right across the border from Nepal, where, I think the earlier ones failed because it just didn't, they were not appropriate to the kitchen culture that is there, in these regions. So, and then even we took this up as an entrepreneurship. So at first we trained people, but from them, about 10-20 people have themselves got the skills, and now they have their brochures and catalogs, and they're ready to go and install these in many different places. Right. So there's been some kind of a scale up, and they are the the master builders, the artisans or whatever. So I think we've also did a post installation surveys for almost about, I don't know, 100, 150 houses. And it's shown that there has been kind of a 25 to 30% reduction in biomass use, and about, again, a 30% efficiency than, these traditional stoves, besides all the health problems that especially women and children used to have.
Super.
Next slide, please.
Can we just quickly run you through that because you're running out of time, Sarala?
This is one important thing, because I think entrepreneurship is going to be very, very important, this community-based entrepreneurship. And this is not only just doing the enterprise thing, but also being able to build, entrepreneurships or institutions that are, enterprises. So from farmer producer groups to self-help groups to committees to cooperatives. So now we are working more at that level rather than from an input level. Next slide, please.
Good.
And I think one of the most important part of our engagement, which continues to be even now during the COVID period, has been the public engagement and citizen science. Where last year we were able to engage with communities and learn what impacted their farming, the farmers the most. This year we were trying to assess and see the much forgotten homestead gardens which we had in our areas. So, how are they contributing to dietary diversity, food security, and also kind of providing a resilience for them when, the markets were closed or the roads were closed or the supply chains were severely impacted by the lockdown. Next slide, please. So these are some of the outreach and public engagement activities we have been engaged with.
Super. I love this little captions that you have. Are they been done by your staff?
Yes, they've been done.
Oh, they're really heart-stopping. It's fantastic what talent can do.
Yes, and so on. And the next one, please. And again, it's about, and this is an ongoing thing that we've been doing. So fortunately, we are also in the National Moth Week period. So a lot of documentation, biodiversity documentation is coming from the communities, and thankful to the internet and, to Android phone and to WhatsApp and whatever. So we've been able to still engage with them even in times of the pandemic.
Thank you, Sarala. Doctor, I'd like to ask you the million-dollar question now. How do we address and redress the monumental challenges? What are the solutions? A quick, please, wrap up, because we want some Q&A.
Yeah. I think I'll mention 3 or 4 things. One is, I think our actions have to be based on science and information using technology. Second, and I'm responding to comments by Mahendra Lama, we have to be more active in public engagement. I'm talking from the perspective of institutions who are doing this type of work. Public engagement remains a sort of weak spot. We know what is happening. We often are unable to communicate this effectively to people as well as policymakers. So coming back to the first point, the use of science, technology, information, to what extent, for example, people who are responsible for Darjeeling's governance of the town, to what extent they are using spatial technologies? They are not hard. Many districts in India are using these information systems. Secondly, to what extent public is engaged in this dialogue with the government agencies in terms of what to do. And it all boils down to the third point I wanted to make, leadership and institutions. Where is the leadership of Darjeeling? I think that these trends are worsening and people have to come together. People have to demonstrate leadership. Leadership cannot come from organizations like ATREE. We can lead in terms of how to address environmental challenges, but there has to be political will. Business community, the society at large, civil society, and the government agencies have to come together. And I hope, Raja, that at least some of the discussions today can lead to the creation of such a forum. I think the problems in a way are very simple. We know what to do. I think what we need is a will and coming together of different stakeholders and also different type of institutions. What are colleges, the many institutions of higher learning in Darjeeling? What sort of issues are they addressing? There are huge talent, young generation, thousands of college-going students, school-going students. We have tremendous resources. Why isn't there a tax on tourists coming into the town? Where is the hotel industry?
Can we?
Well, yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Raja. Thank you everyone who has joined us. At a number of points, the phrase stakeholder approach was mentioned. One of the aims of the Selim Hill Collective is to try to move away from the conventional model of a commercially exploitable plantation towards that of a more just and inclusive tea garden. In this approach, we believe that all stakeholders are very important: the local community, the biodiversity. In fact, just a couple of days ago, a leopard was spotted very close to the house within the tea garden. We will be sending pictures to all those who have joined us today by email of the leopard that was spotted by members of our family at the garden as well. And finally, we believe that a very important entity to this stakeholder approach is the entity of the customer. And that's why I would request all those who do find our initiative interesting and important, if you have it, if you have the resources to support us, head over to Dorje Teas and check out our subscription plans. For now, this is it. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you will be getting an announcement very soon about the Selim Hill Collective doing something with ATREE in order to improve biodiversity conservation and other things within the tea estate. We will be in touch about the next episode of Echoes. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Bawa. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Khaling. Thank you, Raja, for your time. And thank you to all those who have tuned in. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today on a Friday night.